Well, it is the number one story in gaming right now, and that is the controversy surrounding Cyberpunk 2077. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I haven't really been involved in, the latest gaming for the past couple of years. I've sort of moved away from following each and every release and trying to play each and every new release because I think fundamentally gaming has become somewhat disappointing these days. And Cyberpunk is obviously incredibly disappointing. But there were a couple of factors that led me to pick it up. First of all, I had not really followed the hype. I knew it was a hyped game. I knew it was going to be the follow up from the studio that did The Witcher, but I really wasn't following the news. So I didn't have the severe disappointment that a lot of people were experiencing as far as realizing the game wasn't some sort of revolutionary step forward in the RPG genre or in the open world genre. I came into the game and said, okay, this is a solid open world game. But I also picked it up because I had some time on my hands, and that's always a positive, really the overriding factor as to why I get into video games is because I'll find that, okay, I have a week or two where the schedule's a little bit lighter, and I might have some quiet weekends, and at that point, I'll just pick up a game because it works for me. And I also saw that, when I looked at the specs, and I knew this game was a beast to run, but the specs that I saw on their official page actually mentioned the processor that I'm running, which is a fairly old 6700K. It's about a 2016-17 era processor. And I was curious to see the performance. So I picked it up, and I've put about 25 hours into the game. And there really is so much to say. I can't really call this video a review because the game is, I don't think, in a state to review it. If I were going to just throw out a review and say, this is a one-off review, I would have to say, it's a very promising game, a very lush world, but the performance and kind of the glitches, really point to the fact that it is not a finished product. But there's more to say. I kind of see this game as a tech demo, as an experiment that was released because, well, there are business interests that a publicly traded company has, and like all AAA developers, CDPR had no qualms about releasing a half-baked, unfinished product. It happens all the time, and it's one of the reasons why gaming isn't that appealing. But I was still drawn to it. I just wanted to see what it was all about. I wanted to experiment with the different graphical capabilities. And my first and kind of surprising reaction was, for me, on my machine, it really didn't run that badly. Yes, there are problems, but I didn't experience the game-breaking problems that some people are talking about. Obviously on consoles, but even on the PC, I've actually had a pretty decent time with the game from a technical standpoint. So I want to kind of go over a lot of the criticisms of the game, how they kind of impacted my playthrough, because like I said, there's just so many issues here. So, when you talk about the glitches, the glitches that I've experienced have been kind of upsetting, performance-related glitches that nonetheless don't affect how the game plays. You'll see here from this footage, especially driving around is, I think, where the game is the most disappointing. Driving mechanics don't feel great. The cars feel slippery. If you played Grand Theft Auto 4, that kind of feels like the driving in that game as I remember it. Just these kind of lumbering cars that don't really give any sort of pleasure to drive. I don't know if that can be fixed or not, but that is what stands out. And then when you add to that, there seems to be a problem where, and you can see this if you can see the data in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, that, as you're driving, there seems to be some sort of visual hitch. It really stresses the processor, and so the driving is frequently choppy, especially when you're going through uh, the more intensely detailed parts of the city with the lighting and the pedestrians. So it is just not fun to drive a car. Nonetheless, it is the fastest way to get to your objectives outside of fast travel. So it's something you have to put up with. Again, it's irritating, not game breaking. Now, beyond that, as far as, again, visual performance, I'm not running this with ray tracing, and I'll get to the whole ray tracing issue a little bit later here in the discussion. But graphically, it's been fine, and I've actually been getting between 85 and 120 FPS playing on high with DLSS on quality, and again, ray tracing off. And sort of my baseline settings are the ones released by Digital Foundry. And I found it to be quite playable. The only issue is from an FPS standpoint is that I believe that there is a memory leak in this game, and you can kind of read about this online. I don't know that it's been established by the major press outlets, and I don't think CDPR has officially stated this, but I have noticed that if I play past the hour and a half mark, 2 hour mark, I will just start losing frames. So I'll go from that 85 to 120 down to 60 to 80 sometimes. This is non-driving. Sometimes dipping down below that. And then you sort of close out of the game, restart it, and back up to 80 to 120. So that is irritating. Another bug that I experienced was an audio bug where the game has kind of like a graininess or a static. And again, you close out, you restart, and that's gone. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. The memory leak, frame drop will happen with every playthrough if you play long enough. So these are annoyances. These are not things that would make me necessarily put the game down. But obviously, when you pay $60 for a product, you hope that those things are ironed out. And then some of the other minor glitches I've experienced have been AI glitches. Sometimes characters will be floating. They'll do the thing where they kind of raise their arms in a T shape. I've seen that once or twice. It hasn't really affected me on most of my playthroughs. And then just basic AI confusion where you'll sort of be fighting an enemy, and that enemy will kind of get stuck somewhere in the environment, and you can basically just pick him off. So that's the sort of thing where, it's a problem, but it's kind of has the effect of a cheat code, and kind of thing that you would think they'd patch. And then I had 2 instances of what I would call game-breaking bugs. One of them was a situation where the game got stuck in third-person mode after a cutscene, and I couldn't get out of it. Again, I had to restart. That was fine. And another one was where I had to sort of jump through a window, and I thought it was sufficient to just kind of break the glass with one shot of a wrench. But when I tried to jump through the window, I was like teleported back about 200 yards from the building. And I had to do this a couple of times, and then I kind of looked at some videos, and I realized that you really have to break every little shard of glass. So, that to me was at the moment a game-breaking bug, because I couldn't advance, and then I had to look this up. But I would say overall, if I've played this game for about 25 hours now, the bugs have really only affected me for 2 or 3 of those hours total. And I consider that, okay if I'm enjoying the game. Not excusable, but I'm pretty quick to turn a game off if it's wasting my time, and it never got to that level for me. Now, as I said, I didn't do a lot of reading prior to picking this game up. I wasn't following the hype, so I didn't know what they promised. I like The Witcher. I thought The Witcher 3 was one of the most fleshed out, interesting worlds in, I would say, all of video game history. It was a dreary game, it was a depressing game, but I thought it was really true to the European Middle Ages. And, it didn't give us this, high fantasy setting where everything was great. It had a kind of human, almost literary grittiness to it. So that was kind of the only thing that I was expecting here. A fully fleshed out world, intelligently built, with decent storytelling. And to me, that's what I've experienced so far with Cyberpunk. The world itself is gorgeous. It really captures the historical aesthetic of cyberpunk. It has, the elements of Japanese cyberpunk. It has these little visual nods to Blade Runner. The Matrix. It really unifies a lot of those images that we have in our mind about the cyberpunk genre in a very effective way. And it's not a visual kind of name dropping. Like, it doesn't feel like cheap references. They're nicely woven in to the story, to the vistas that you'll see. And when you combine that with this amazing lighting design, and again, I'm not playing it with ray tracing. I have ray tracing off. But the light maps that they've created just with kind of the normal techniques are just visually engrossing. In fact, one of my favorite aspects of the game is where you're in a car with one of the characters, and you have to drive to an area in real time, and you'll be having a conversation, and you can just kind of look out the window and watch the cityscape change as you drive. It's it's kind of this small quiet moment, or several quiet moments of the game, and it just looks great. It is just one of my favorite things to do. And because the map is so intricately detailed, what I found is it leaves an almost more profound afterimage than you get from the actual images as you're playing. You feel like when you turn the game off, you've been somewhere. You've had this experience in this garishly lit, but ultimately very sad and dreary world. And there's scenes that kind of stick with you. Now, I will admit, and I will give credence to the complaint that when you're in the game, when you're in the city, there's not that much to do. It's not like you can go into a lot of buildings. There are little side stories that crop up. There are sort of vigilante missions. You could find yourself, in the midst of a gang war. So there are things like that, but this is not a city that you're interacting with as the game exists right now. So, that's a weakness. But again, just the outright beauty of it, I think, is something that stays with you as you play. Now, the gameplay itself is not bad. I did see that a lot of people were complaining, well, the gunplay isn't that great. The first-person combat isn't that great. The RPG element isn't what we thought. It's hard for me to assess what it should have been because I didn't follow it, but I would say, the gunplay, the shooting, to me is fine. I think it's better than Fallout, which, was really more of an RPG than a shooter, I think. So I'm not upset by that. I don't like bullet sponge games where, some enemy is just so high above your level you can headshot them 50 times and they'll still be alive. It's a mechanic that, you see in The Division or Destiny, and that's kind of the deal here. You find all these guns, they have different rarity ratings, different weight ratings, and you have to sort of build your stash and sell because you don't want to carry too many things. So that part of it is not my favorite, but the actual shooting, the actual, if you play with blades, if you level up, that aspect of the character, it feels good enough. If anything, the blade combat is probably a little overpowered in this version of the game, because you can kind of just rush NPCs and chop them to bits. But again, I'm not looking for ultimate challenge. I'm not looking to invest 100 hours leveling up my character. So, that did not bother me too much. Now, if you read the debates online, I think another fairly common criticism is that the game does nothing new, or its open world isn't as good as something like GTA 5. And I can see that. I don't think it's a bad open world. I think it's if anything, a very traditional, very, very standard open world game. But, that didn't necessarily bother me. It's a genre that, while it's not my favorite genre, it's a genre that, I can get into from time to time. I think it's one of those genres that excels in the PC format. And this was more of the same. I mean, it's not essentially any different than GTA 5, the Saints Row games. I think it's very much, in that vein. And that, to me, was not a bad thing. Now, if you were expecting this to be revolutionary, yeah, then you're going to be very upset by what you find here. But if you want a good-looking, good-playing PC shooter, that's essentially what this is. Unless you're encountering all of the bugs, which ruins it. But at its core, it is a solid, traditional open-world game. So, moving on to the storytelling, the narrative here is okay. I think it draws heavily on Hollywood tropes, which I don't like. I don't really want to play a movie, so it's not, as subtle. It's not as well done as The Witcher. I think it's, to me, or at least The Witcher 3, a very noticeable level down. It's playing with the kind of the typical heist narratives and the loner, all that sort of thing that you've seen a million times in recent video games and modern Hollywood. But it doesn't get to the point where it's overly irritating or overly stupid. I think the enjoyment of playing it kind of, you can kind of ignore the bland or trite or cliched writing. And it does a nice kind of scene skip mechanic where it seems to skip to salient conversation points. So if you're in one of these longer dialogue scenes, and you just hit the skip button, you're not going to miss anything. It'll take you to those junctures in the conversation where, you'll get the key piece of information, or you'll have the opportunity to select the appropriate response. I don't know to what extent your conversation choices matter. There were a couple moments where I was like, it seemed like I said something that was contrary to where the conversation was going, and it just went in its pre-planned direction. So I think that's something that you'd have to evaluate on multiple playthroughs with the different character types. One thing I can say as far as character development or presentation is the sort of facial designs of these characters, the kind of in-engine facial animations combined with the great lighting, to me adds a subtlety to human expression that you don't typically find in scenes that aren't pre-rendered. Now, I don't have the technical skill to say, are all of these scenes in-engine? I tend to think that they are, because even in scenes that look fairly cinematic, you can kind of look around the room It doesn't feel like a video is playing. But even in very clearly, gameplay scenarios where you're starting a conversation with someone, just the way the light hits their face, the subtle grins and winks that the characters give you, I think is really well done and kind of gives you a certain degree of immersion into these interactions. So my overall kind of takeaway of the game itself is that it's not a bad game. And if you can play it on PC and the PC runs it reasonably well, it's enjoyable. It's not going to convince you to like a open world game if you don't like that genre, and it's not doing anything different in that genre. But it looks nice. It's a cool, interesting setting, and it plays well enough. So as somebody who's easily pissed off by modern games, I really wasn't angry at this. I really didn't regret my purchase from the gameplay standpoint. But the one issue that I think is worth noting, and this is where perhaps my harshest criticism comes in, is ray tracing. The implementation of ray tracing. I am not running on the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. Like I said, I've got a 6700K processor, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and I'm running an RTX 2080, which was the first generation ray tracing cards. And I found when I activate ray tracing in any game, particularly this game, but this would sort of be across the board, the gameplay hit that you take, the frame rate, the frames that you lose to activate this technology is very disappointing. I will honestly say, and it could be due to the older hardware that I have, I don't see the benefit. Do you get a slightly more realistic lighting in certain instances? Yes. But I don't want to play at 30 FPS. I don't want to play at 40 FPS. That to me is a downgrade. So I'm upping the visual fidelity, but downgrading my gameplay experience. I don't see why this is a useful technology. It stresses the GPU so much that now you need this DLSS AI-assisted rendering technique to get the game playable. And to me, whenever I've activated DLSS, it degrades the visual fidelity. There's a kind of softness to the presentation that's not there when you're just running a game normally. So I think, I wonder to what extent, because the standard game lighting is so good, it might be the best that I've seen in a PC game. Because the standard lighting is so effective, why did they invest so much into ray tracing other than to hammer home what I think is ultimately a NVIDIA marketing gimmick? I can't think of a reason why ray tracing and DLSS exists if not to constantly force an upgrade of each generation of NVIDIA card, because you have a technology that 1% of, or less than 1% of PC gamers can utilize effectively. So for everyone else who doesn't have that level of card, you're going to have an unpleasant, visually degraded gameplay experience. Unless, of course, you can get your hands on a 3080 or a 3090, which, due to the shortages of those things, not many players can. So I think this game suffers from being connected to that NVIDIA marketing strategy. So many more people could have potentially appreciated this game if they left out ray tracing for now, and they just used whatever techniques they're doing with normal lighting, which again are impressive, and optimized it so that it would run well on a wide variety of PCs, as opposed to targeting the 1% or the less than 1% of people who can really appreciate it. I would have been fine with them doing that and then saying, hey, for those of you who have a top level card, one of our DLCs is going to be the ray tracing pack, and we'll release that, and you can pay for it later on. I think that would have been the better approach. So as somebody who's very critical of modern gaming, the whole situation surrounding this game, looking beyond the horizon of the PC, that it is a disgrace. It's one of the most disappointing, one of the most egregious examples of publisher greed and just screwing up a release. I think this might be the most screwed up release in the history of gaming. Looking at it on the PC, I do like it. I can't say that I dislike this game. It is a decent open world game. It is a lush, interesting setting. I hope they patch it. I hope they give you more things to do in this setting. I look forward to all the mods that I would assume will be coming out if The Witcher 3 is anything to go by. So it's a game. It's a strange game because if I were doing a recommendation, I would say, of course you can't. No one could recommend this game. Reviewing it as it exists today, it would be a very low review score if you try to do it in any way, objectively. You just could not praise this game. But once you strip away all of those issues and you kind of play it for what it is not a bad game. It's a fun game, and it's a game with potential. So, if you're considering it, I would suggest holding off for about a year. And, I myself have done a lot of the side quests. I deliberately haven't progressed the story as much as I might otherwise have done in those 25 hours, because I kind of want to wait for a couple patches to maybe play the second half of the game with a little bit better performance and a little bit better fidelity. So, in essence, I can't recommend it, but I've personally enjoyed the tech demo. And, if you have a beefy PC and you're interested, I would say approach it as a tech demo. If you like tinkering with settings, if you like analyzing your frame rates, and you might get some enjoyment out of it now. Otherwise, I think this will be a fairly strong game, at least on PC, in about a year to a year and a half.